Okay.
All right, it looks like we have started. Hello, and thank you for spending some time to cultivate your resilience and well-being during the pandemic. My name is Joe Salemi. I'm your Deputy Executive Director with Landscape Ontario. To engage in today's webinar, definitely please use the chat to ask any questions or make any comments. We'd love to hear from you. Today's webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to catch it anytime you need to following our broadcast. COVID-19 is a challenge we can't see or touch. It's ripped our way of life right out from underneath us. To navigate the current uncertainty, we want to find balance and root ourselves in a state of mind that holds and encourages us to cultivate resilience and promote well-being while living amidst unprecedented uncertainty. It's important to be kind to ourselves. A full year since this has all started. It's still an anxious and stressful time for everyone, and it's okay if you feel more anxious than usual. It's okay to take time for ourselves and to manage our mental health. We're doing the best that we can in a time when simply turning on the news can feel overwhelming. Today, we have our incredible panel with us from the LO COVID Task Force and a really special guest, Mike Stroh. So a little bit about Mike. Over the last 5+ years, he's presented to over 50,000 people in live audiences discussing workplace mental health, K-12 education, and how to create mentally healthy teams that are connected, effective, and purpose-driven. He's regularly featured on Canadian national news discussing a variety of mental health and addiction-related topics. In 2019, Mike received the Innovative Exemplary Practice Award in Student Leadership and Mental Health from the Toronto Catholic District School Board and was chosen by Arc'teryx as one of their distinguished global problem solvers for his use of design thinking in K-12 education and workplace mental health. Over the years, Start With Me has worked with some of the world's biggest brands like Amazon, Hyundai, the City of Toronto, and Canada's largest school boards. Mike has a master's in counseling psychology and works as a therapist in private practice. Thank you so much for joining us, Mike. Your insight and perspective are exactly what we need right now, and I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, everybody. Welcome. I am going to share my slides here, and I'm getting better at listening to people introduce me, and so it's interesting to notice how that works. But thank you for the lovely introduction, and let's just get into this. So before I kind of get into it all, yes, everyone is encouraged to participate in any way. So whether that's typing in the chat, using the raise your hand function, that will enable us to engage in more thorough and personal conversation. So it can be more helpful and more meaningful. So please do that. And please take a breath or two and just sort of settle in. I think a lot of the things we're going to cover are quite useful and relevant to all of us right now. And I hope that you find this helpful. So, this is just our little model of how we do these things traditionally. Of course, since COVID happened, things have been flipped around quite a lot. So I'm not going to sort of spend too much time on this, but this 5C model can be used in our personal lives, but also as groups in together. So we always remind people and ourselves that when we can look inside first, we tend to be more helpful to those around us. And the difficulty with that is as human beings, we're wired to not look inside. We're wired to look around and kind of point fingers and to perhaps misdirect our thoughts and our actions and those kind of things. So this is kind of how we try to remind people and ourselves that when we look inside first, that tends to have much better outcomes. These are the 5 main topics we're going to cover. And I'm going to have to speak quickly about certain things. And so part of that request to you is to be understanding in some sense about not being able to cover everything in depth, which I have a tendency to want to do all the time, but of course we have to manage our time well. And I want to try to give you as much helpful information as I can within the time we have. And I love this little picture because it's such a nice reminder to me that if we could all see what was going on inside each other's minds, we would tend to be more understanding, more compassionate, more forgiving, and perhaps even have better relationships. I don't know if anyone out there can identify with this image here, but from time to time, I think we all can. And the more that we can recognize there's all this noise going on, it can also help us soothe our own stress or tension or whatever emotions that we're having in that moment. And I do think it's a very helpful reminder as much as we can when we're in a difficult spot or we notice somebody else is in a difficult spot. This idea of connection, which flows from that, is obviously the main thing impacting all of us right now. Outside of the uncertainty of what is going to happen from day to day, not only in our families, in our personal lives, in our communities, in the province, in the country, but globally too. There's a lot of potential directions that we can all go, and that can be difficult to live with, as was mentioned. Even turning on the news, sometimes it's like, whoa. And so when we can return to our need for connection, whatever that looks like, and whatever way we can perhaps bring it to life, is a very helpful thing. And we know that social connection, as you can sort of see here from this statistic, is a huge huge indicator of lifelong health. And it's similar in the sense that we can't kind of hold or grasp what it does for us, but being connected in any way, even if it's to a plant, to be quite honest, my plant collection has exploded over the last year, and I do have some sort of felt connection to the plants. But anyhow, you can bring that into your life in any way is helpful, and we're going to practice a few of those things. And this is my request, which is a comfort agreement. I kind of mentioned the first one before. I'm going to have to generalize about certain things to cover as much as I can. So please give me the benefit of the doubt for that. The second thing is look for the similarities, not the differences. So we tend to, I don't want to say as a blanket statement, but here's a generalization. We tend to look at the differences between us as opposed to the similarities. And when it comes to our mental health and well-being, that's a particularly unhelpful way of looking at the world. And so the things that I share and the examples that I give, and perhaps what other people are saying, see if you can kind of recognize that as part of you as well. And the last thing is this idea of our common humanity, which I will touch on in the self-compassion part. It is linked to a host of positive emotions and better relationships and so forth. So this kind of collective idea of we are more similar than we are different on so many different levels can be very helpful for our well-being and our mood and our relationships. Well, I'm going to play this video and then we'll get going.
Then I was like, yeah, right, man. Oh! Oh, my head.
Please don't complain. It'll ruin the vibe.
Just...
It's like you're not even trying to walk.
Have you ever tried not having diarrhea?
God, my migraine is killing me.
You take meds for that?
Oh my God, dude, I cut myself and it looks really, really bad. Some people have it way worse than you do. You gotta chill out.
So I guess you're not going out with us tonight. Again. You're such a flake.
Oh man, I really think I sprained it this time. I gotta go see my physical therapist.
You go to therapy?
Yeah?
Whatever, weirdo.
Can you hold on one second?
Honestly, your attitude sucks.
Ugh.
You taking another insulin shot?
Yeah, I kinda have to. Have you ever thought about dropping the pharmaceuticals and fighting this the natural way? My diabetes?
Enough is enough. It's a beautiful day, man. It's time to get up.
Dude, I just got eye surgery.
Yeah, like a week ago.
Well, it still hurts.
Ooh, I think your friend hurt himself.
I need help.
Nah, he's fine.
All right. The video never gets old for me. I think it's a wonderful example of this sort of paradox between how we approached physical ailments versus emotional, psychological ones. The one point that I think is missing from our collective conversation about this is that you often see things from, I'm trying not to be judgmental, large mental health organizations that say things like, don't stigmatize people, or be understanding, don't be prejudicial, don't judge others, etc., and so forth. While that is in some sense true, it misses the point that as humans, that by our nature, we are judgmental. We are perhaps not so understanding and patient, and that's okay. That's just who we are. So if we can recognize that first and remind ourselves that we are inherently that way, that tends to reduce the friction we have in relationships, as opposed to assuming that other people or ourselves should not be that way. And the other part of the video that I love, because it points to this idea that the process of getting help for a physical ailment is much more clear. If I break my arm, I go to the hospital, I get a cast. The doctor tells me in such and such amount of time, it'll heal and I'll be better. When it comes to a psychological issue or emotional one, et cetera, so forth, it's not as straightforward. And we're not, you could say, we haven't evolved, so to speak, as a society to be able to support people with their emotional problems the way we have with their quote unquote physical ones. And I think there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. Part of us being here right now is an example that we are all moving in the direction of trying to learn how to do this better. And that's a wonderful thing. But I don't think the difficulties sometimes, or the potential challenges of supporting people with their mental health, I don't think that's honored as much as it could be. And that's my 2 cents on that whole situation. I think another example would be if you're at work and somebody falls over and hurts themselves, etc., you do know pretty much what to do. And most people do as well. And so if that same person comes to work and they're in a super bad mood, or they have an emotional breakdown, or some people may experience symptoms of psychosis, whatever it is, again, we don't have the collective skills to deal with that in a way that is as effective as we are with our physical ailments. So I do think it's important to honor that and to recognize that, because I think it also helps us to be more understanding, less judgmental of when people do have a hard time in those situations. Yeah, so I'm just curious if anything I have said thus far has brought up anything for anybody, or anybody need any clarification or so forth.
I have a question, Mike.
Please.
I think the issue between physical ailments and mental ailments is just how obvious it is to the observer, and how can you approach somebody to find out if what they're experiencing is a particular difficulty, if there is something that we can do. I mean, I'm not trained to help like I am in first aid, but I don't even know how to recognize if somebody needs help. Like, and how do you approach that without offending somebody?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And I will get there in section 3. But that's great. Thank you for asking, because bringing that to light and being sincere, because I think most of us have similar experience. And even myself, all the things I've been through, my brother lives with schizophrenia, and I've spent many years in psychiatric institutions or in jail trying to get him, be with him in a way that I didn't always know what I was doing. And so I think it's just sort of part of life, and reminding ourselves of that is also very important as well. And we're not always going to say the right thing. Okay, I'm skipping ahead here, so I'll come back and we'll get into the self-awareness. I think that the first way to answer your question is that the better we can get at recognizing these things within ourselves, then we're going to be more effective at being supportive to others. So the first part of here, I like this frame here. You could think of our minds in some sense as the thinking mind and the observing mind, or the way that our brains kind of are functioning. Part of what has allowed human beings to, quote unquote, become the dominant species on the earth is that our thinking mind, this problem solving apparatus, you could also call it a word machine or a thought machine, has gotten so skilled at identifying danger in our environment. So in the past, we could identify predators, or we could identify things that were harmful to our communities. And then we would come up with a solution to protect ourselves from that danger. So a simple one might be, we're living in a jungle or in a plain or something, and we build a wall around our village to protect us from potential threats. So problem, solution, linear thinking. When it comes to mental health, that problem solution orientation actually works in reverse. It's harmful to us, because what the inclination is, so for example, if I have a negative thought that I don't want to have, or if I have a negative emotion, that problem solving brain goes, oh, that's not good. I don't like that. How can I stop that from happening? I want to push it away. I want to block it out. And one technical term for that would be called thought suppression. So if I'm trying to suppress my negative thoughts or my unwanted thoughts, shameful thoughts, and so forth, that just creates more negative thoughts, not less. And that's a huge misconception in pop psychology, so to speak, where you see things such as, just think positively, right? Everything's going to be okay, and so on and so forth. And there's a kernel of truth to that, but it's not very helpful, because if that doesn't work for people, then the assumption is, oh, there's something wrong with me, or I'm not good at this, or whatnot. So we have to be able to notice these negative patterns and give them the attention that they need. And that's where the observing mind comes in and can be so helpful. The observing mind in this context might be considered awareness, or it's something that can be cultivated through different practices. And what it allows us to do is just to notice that we're having certain thoughts and emotions while they're happening, not to fix them, not to stop them, not to manipulate our lives so that they go away. It's just to notice that they're there. And then I'll try to share some practices around that, but this is a lifelong journey. It's not like you just cross some finish line where you're like, oh, I've got control over my negative thoughts. They're never going to happen again. This is the common human experience to suffer, which is another misconception I think about a lot of pop psychology these days, is that there's this assumption that we're not supposed to suffer and we're supposed to be happy all the time. And that's total, I'll use one of my 2 swear words, bullshit, right? Like, that's total bullshit. What we do know is that if we can honor our suffering or difficulties and practice cultivating positive emotion and those things, then we can be perhaps more free from the negative experiences, but they never go away. They're always part of life. And so how these things are instigated in our own personal life, and then you can see how this works in other people, is primarily there's this underlying negative core belief that's going on. So we might think if I'm interpreting my daily life in this way, I might think I'm inadequate, or everything's my fault, or I don't have any agency. I might project this onto other people. So I might not want to share what's going on inside of me because I think other people can't be trusted, or they'll treat me poorly, and so forth. And then furthermore, out into the world, if I think the world's a dangerous place and not going to treat me well, and all those things, then I'm not going to perceive what's happening in a way that's going to help me. I'm going to perceive these things in a way that's actually going to increase my negative experiences, and it's going to isolate me from the world. And therefore, I'm not going to be able to find a pathway out of it. And it's important to remember that everybody has these negative core beliefs. The research is quite thorough on this. It's just a matter of how much they impact you and how they impact you. And some of us are more inclined to be suspicious of others. How this might work in the workplace is if you make a mistake on a job, or you fail to submit something to a superior, or you screw up with a customer, whatever that is, and you start to notice you're being really hard on yourself, and you're being super fearful of what might happen, that might be an example of a negative core belief working in your experience in that moment. Or if you start to be suspicious of colleagues, or suspicious of customers, or etc., that might be an indication that a negative core belief is acting up in you at that moment. And then if you also think that by doing something about it, or speaking up for yourself, this might be in reference to this idea of the world's not the safe place where I can be open and vulnerable, then you keep things inside. And that, again, is another form of this core belief happening. So it's important to just recognize if these things are true for you, and when they're true for you, and how it's impacting you. And this is you. So once you are aware of that, this is an example of how these things impact us. So one might be a trigger, and another is a modifier. So a modifier is something that's constant in our life, like the pandemic, or perhaps you have a family problem, or you lose a job, or all those kind of things. That is stress. And when those things pile up, the impact on our thoughts, emotions, sensations, behaviors increases. And then a trigger is something that happens in the moment. So whether somebody yells at you or cuts you off in traffic, then you react in a way, and you have a cycle of thoughts, emotions, sensations. So just to clarify this from a neuroscience perspective, is the one thing that is non-negotiable in some sense are sensations. So we are wandering around in the world, we see light, we hear things, we smell things, we feel things. That's non-negotiable. That's happening all the time. And what our brainstem, it's really our brainstem and our neocortex, is trying to do is balance what we are taking in through our perceptions or through our sensations, with what's going on inside our body. And when those things are out of whack, that's when suffering and emotional dysregulation gets really strong. So for example, if I'm in line at a grocery store and I'm getting really impatient, and I start to have this cycle of emotion, and I start to think, what's going on? Why is that person, every little micro behavior starts to drive me crazy. That's an imbalance between what's actually happening in the world and how I feel inside. And so what we want to learn to do is to recognize that, notice how impatient we're being, and all the thoughts and judgments and difficult emotions that are coming up with us. And then we can have some self-talk, or we can practice some breathing techniques, whatever it is. But that's just an example of how that might work. One breathing technique, and since I just thought about it now, I really want to share with everybody right now, and we'll do it, it's called a physiological sigh. And this, according to the neuroscientists, this is the most effective way to reduce tension and stress in the moment that it's happening. So forget about all the life circumstances that we can adjust and work on it. So what we want to do is we want to take 2 quick in breaths through the nose and then 1 long, deep exhale with a sigh. So I'm just going to model it quickly and then maybe everyone can try it once. So we're going to take 2 in breaths. So and so I actually want everyone, can you just try that in the privacy of your own space? You don't have your mics on. No one's going to hear you. So just 2 quick and deep in breaths through the nose. You got to sigh. You got to make a sound. So if you do that at least 2 times in a moment of deep stress or deep agitation, within about 30 seconds, your body will send out the chemicals and the neurotransmitters or whatever it is. I don't have the right words for that. It will help you calm down 100%. Okay, so sort of describe this one, but here's just one. I gave a personal example here. If I get really triggered by fear of authority from my past of being a troublemaker and etc. So if I mess up on an application, say for the psychotherapy college, I start to get really paranoid. I start to think, oh my God, my life's going to be over. They're going to kick me out of the college. All these things, like I get super duper paranoid and my thinking is way outside of reality. I start to get really anxious, tightness in my chest. My heart starts pounding. I start to sweat. I might drink too much coffee, or I might not be able to sit down. Can't focus. And the physical sensations are telling me that something's wrong. And so what this practice here is, just getting clarity on these things can be really helpful for you. And then what we're going to practice here, self-compassion, or some people prefer the word inner strength, is to, again, skillfully give ourselves the attention that we need in these moments of difficulty. And self-compassion, I think, is a beautiful skill to have. I think as a therapist, but also as an individual who has had lots of difficult experiences in life, self-compassion has been the most helpful thing for me. The other practices that we just looked at are helpful too, but self-compassion, I think, is really powerful thing. So it's linked to less depression, anxiety, stress, etc., and more happiness and life satisfaction and confidence and so forth. And it has 3 main components. So the first component is mindfulness versus self-absorption. So if we do something wrong, or that we deem as wrong, we can fall into a pattern of being self-absorbed, like, oh, I'm such a bad person, there's something wrong with me, or this, whatever that narrative is for you. So mindfulness just helps us, if you think about that observing thinking mind, it just helps us snap out of it a little bit and notice, oh, wow, I'm caught in this thought process that is not helping me. And for most people, without practice in this domain, we are so identified with our thoughts that we don't even know that we actually are. We don't even know that we're walking around living in a way that is so identified with what's going on in between our ears that we aren't even aware that we can observe it from above, so to speak. The next part is self-kindness versus self-criticism. So again, in that moment of distress, or we do something wrong, or we say something we didn't want to say, or we feel bad, we can be really self-critical. So I don't know about anyone out there, but I tend to be really hard on myself when I make a mistake. So I don't know if the panelists can put up a hand to show, but anyone even typing in the chat, like, are you hard on yourself when you make mistakes? And how, and can you notice how that impacts your mood and how that impacts your choices and so forth. And the next part of the self-compassion practice is this idea again of our common humanity versus isolation. So we tend to close off when things are difficult and we tend to isolate. And so part of this reminder is, oh, wait a second, like I'm not uniquely flawed or dysfunctional because I feel bad about myself. This is the common human experience. And when I can remind myself of that, I tend to have more openness and I tend to be more willing to be kind to myself and willing to do the things that I know I need to do to help myself. So a simple way to bring this into everyday life is when let me preamble this. When you are in a relatively good place in your life or just in your day, and you see somebody else having a hard time, so this might be a colleague, and this is sort of leads us into how we can approach people and be aware of these things. Do you tend to notice that you are kind to them, or that you're more willing to help them, or that you want to help them? And how do you do that? Like, what's your body posture? What's your tone of voice? How do you speak to people when you're trying to help them? And then if you contrast that to, again, how do you speak to yourself when you've failed, felt inadequate, done something wrong, and so forth? And this paradox is so important to recognize. And some people are not that way. Some people are kind to themselves. Some people are good at this, but the majority of us tend not to be, or tend to have this a bit of a pattern of being really more critical to oneself than to others. And so what we want to do to cultivate the skill of self-compassion, there's lots of practices, but this is sort of the first part is, can I speak to myself in a similar way that I would speak to somebody else when they're suffering or when they're having a hard time? And how does that feel? Like, what does that do? How does that impact you? And start to notice that. And so how you might carry that forth in some way is, I love this idea of a U-turn or turning inward. And this is another practice that I'll invite you to do right now, is that actually, I'm going to ask for a volunteer maybe from the panel. Does anybody want to share an experience recently that has been quite difficult? Doesn't have to be like, let's put it in the 5 to 7 range out of 10. Nothing like super difficult, but just something that's irritating you or you're having a bit of a struggle with. You don't have to, but if not, I'll use myself as the guinea pig.
I was going to ask Mike again if you have the example, because again, some of it when you're dealing, this is a great leadership team within the association. So part of when I think it was where Peter was going a little bit, how we deal with crisis or stress is very different from what we think we see in our peers, and how do you approach it? Because again, a lot of times I think it's by nature we take U-turns or deflect or do a lot of the things knowingly or not knowingly that you've already talked about and shared with us. But when someone looks inward and isolates, how do you approach that situation? I think most of these panelists here tend to always get to that spot and make the U-turn or lean on their peers and others that may have knowledge or experience to help us through it, but that's not true of most people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. I think here I'll try to put this into a real life scenario and let me know if it makes sense. So this goes back to why it's so important to be able to reflect personally. So if I see one of my kids having a really difficult moment, and all they want to do is make me go away. Like, go away, I don't want to talk to you, go away, whatever it is. So the U-turn idea is like, personally, before I react in a way that may not be helpful or whatever it is, just come to myself. And this is a self-compassion practice. And it's just like, honoring this difficult moment. So like I might say something like, and of course I'm not going to pause in the middle of their bedroom and do this, but I might go through it quickly in my mind, or I might exit the bedroom and practice it lying down on the bed. But I just would say something like, this is a moment of suffering. Like when my kid is this agitated and they're not well, and you can replace kid with colleague or employee or etc. This isn't sort of just in relationship to parent child, but it's like, wow, when my son or daughter is in this state and I can't help them, that hurts me, or it makes me feel bad, or I don't like it. I feel inadequate. I feel like helpless. I don't know what to do. And that's difficult to experience. And just to breathe and to like allow myself to feel helpless and to feel inadequate and to know that I don't have an answer, so to speak. And also to notice my impulse to want to fix and to want to help and to want to problem solve. And so however that looks, it can be different from day to day, but I just have to bring myself the self-kindness and the respect that like, this just is difficult and I don't know what to do. And I can breathe, and I might do that. I might try that or whatever it is. But so we start there, and then the next part I think is communication, and we'll walk through like how you can say so. But does that help at least like point us? It's like this ever-present balance between self and other, and I think the more that we can be centered ourselves, the better we're going to be of service to other people. So I know that doesn't directly answer your question, which I will in a bit, but that piece of the internal must happen first. Or I shouldn't say must. If it happens first, it makes you more effective at being helpful. Okay. And then the follow-up question to this sort of internal recognition of the difficult moment is there's a yin and yang of self-compassion. And part of it is the yang is the more protective, motivating, sort of outward action oriented, and the yin is the comforting and the soothing and the validating. So the first part is the validating and the soothing, at least for me in that situation. And then it's like, I ask myself, what do I need right now? What do I need to do for myself right now? Okay, maybe I need to go back into my son's room and ask him how he's going. Or maybe I need to lie down here for a bit longer. So asking that question, what do I need right now, is also really helpful. So I make the choice. I'm going to go and say something. Let's just watch this video here. Okay, it goes on for another 10 seconds or so. So the point of showing that one is because it's so cute. And the other is that it's an example that our ability to communicate is what's called pre-verbal. So we know, because we're animals, human beings, that we can see other people when they're having a hard time. Like they don't need to tell us all the time. Sometimes they do, or sometimes we need to ask, but just generally speaking, you have within you the skills to notice these things more than sometimes we remember. It's hardwired into us. So I guess actually this slide should be after this one, but it doesn't matter. So what we can do in a situation like has been brought up. So I see somebody who I think is having a hard time. The first thing to do is to remember to use I statements. I statements is like the most important thing when we're having perhaps uncomfortable or difficult conversations. So I walk up to person A and I say, hey, to me, or I think, which is actually here, I think you are having a hard time. Or to me, it looks like something's going on. And I feel sad, or I feel worried, or I feel anxious, or whatever it is. So state the thought and then state the feeling. I think, I feel. And then if we go back to this one, the validation piece is like asking them for validation. So I think this, I feel this, is that true? We want we want people to feel they have a sense of agency and control over what is going on, particularly when they're having a hard time. So another way you could do it is like, hey, to me, it looks like you are having a difficult time and I'm a bit concerned. Is that true? And then this is where we could spend all of these ideas and topics are lifelong practices, but this is where because if they say, no, I'm fine. I mean, most of us would say that. I'm fine. Don't worry. All good. Then it's upon us to deal with our own, perhaps like irritation or sadness that, oh, I know this person's having a hard time. I want to help them, but they just don't want my help. And that's really hard to deal with too. And so that's where we have to notice, like, what is it about me that is making it difficult for me to navigate the situation? Like, am I overly trying to help? Am I not respecting this person's desire for autonomy and privacy? It gets complicated, right? And so if it's in a workplace situation where there's specific guidelines and rules and norms of behavior, then that can help us make a decision, right? It's like, well, this person is not following the expectations and so on and so forth. So then that gives us information for how we might further address the situation. But those are the sort of core fundamental things. I statements, I think, I feel. To me, it looks like you are having a hard time. You are feeling this. Is that true? And then we wait for the response. And if the person is resistant to being open and honest, then we can say, okay, cool. Just know that I'm here for you, or that if you ever do want to talk about this, that I'm here to talk about it. And then you can kind of check back in with that person after a week or 2 weeks or whatever it is. You can use your inherent awareness as a human to judge whether it's an appropriate time or not. But that's really difficult because these are difficult situations. And so we're not always going to have the right answer. But I think, and to Peter's question earlier, I think if we do our best and try to be as respectful of the person and their autonomy and privacy as possible, then we can't worry too much about like how they're going to interpret it, I should say. Right? We're not responsible for other people's feelings. And that's really important to remember, because I think it, particularly around mental health stuff, like if we do our best and we are respectful and etc., then how they react to it is none of our business, so to speak. Does that make sense? Like, I think we, as caring humans, we care about each other. And so sometimes when we do upset people, we think we've done something wrong, perhaps, and this is with the preamble that we've done everything we can to the best of our ability and done it respectfully. And so how they respond to it is not our business, or it's like not our responsibility. That makes sense? Okay, cool. Because it is a bit of a complex, or it can get complex, and trying to make it as concise as I can in this bit of time. Another piece to this, which I won't do now because of the time, is just like, I don't know about anyone else, but like I often say yes when I mean to say no, or I say no when I want to say yes. So if someone's offering me help and I'm like, oh, no, I don't need help. And then 2 minutes later, I'm like, why did I just say no? Actually, yes, I do need help. oh, Jesus, or vice versa. And so that's another part of the interpersonal communication stuff that can be helpful to notice. This idea of productivity, my colleague Ellen is more of has much more wise in this domain than I am. I have a super hard time with being organized and et cetera. But where I think, for me personally, and I think more generally speaking, this idea of self-awareness, compassion, communication, if I am aware of what's causing me distress, it's not about being like filling my calendar with things and being organized in that sense. It's what gets in the way of me being as productive as I know I can be. Well, generally, it's what's going on in between your head and inside your body and how you're communicating with other people. So you can get a plethora of information out there on like how to be more productive and organized and so forth. And it's all good. But what we are working towards is helping people understand what's going on inside them and in their relationships that impacts their ability to do the things they want to be doing or need to be doing. Like, and then the last piece, well-being, which we'll kind of get into. But these are just some questions you can answer that are a little more operational. Like, is this even my responsibility? I think is the big one. And if it's not, then how do I communicate that to somebody else? Like, hey, I think this isn't my responsibility. And I feel a little bit annoyed that I'm being asked to do this. Something like that.
Mike, quick
Yes.
question. As you go through this, and again, a lot of the members that we watched in this are owners of companies and dealing with teams, small and big. As you look at these situations, is in most of what we kind of profess to our members is the fact of having this constant education, constant training. It's usually skill set development, but packaging these kind of conversations in group exercises where your team's under tremendous stress from the external factors right now. Is it helpful to do that, to kind of soften those that are isolating themselves, or at least to start the conversation, to give them tools to get out of potentially that dark space that you're just feeling all the negative headlines in the news, the personal stresses of not being social like we normally would, us asking them to restrict their movements as much as possible, having these kinds of conversations and helping them prepare. Because I hear over and over with mental health, the more you're prepared, the more you have a plan about how the afternoon, tomorrow, the next day is going to transpire in your own mind, helps with the preparation or getting through these spots versus feeling the load on you all the time. So is it group or individual? Can it be a balance of both? Or are there tools that we just make this part of our day-to-day life to help teams get through this?
Yeah, such an amazing question. And it's sort of if we could all answer that, we'd all be on a better path. But I think my initial feedback is, I think it's both. I think so it'd be personal and also collective group. As leaders, perhaps, or I think in the literature around all this stuff, of course, when leadership can embody the behaviors that they want from their colleagues or their employees, et cetera, then it's more, the colleagues will be more, or will have a sense that there's an invitation for them to also be honest and sincere and open. So it has to be role modeled, I think, is another big thing, and that speaks to what I said earlier. There's often there's so much talk and not enough action. And that's sort of the quote of like, you can't think your way into right action. You have to act your way into right thinking. And so we want to act out the behaviors that we want others to embody as well. And a simple skill, anytime you start a meeting, and of course, depending on, is it an emergency meeting? We have 10 minutes? But one thing that is really helpful is just to start a meeting with, I'm just reading the chat, sorry, is to just start with a check-in. So I'll give two examples. One is like, what's lifting you up? What's bringing you down? So, and then start modeling that. And it's not going to happen overnight. People aren't all of a sudden just going to start sharing their dark or innermost personal information, but it has to become habitual. So like today, I got in a fight with my wife before coming to work, and that's why I'm in a bad mood. but it's beautiful outside and that's lifting me up. So it's just like about opening up these conversations more frequently. So that's one. Another one is just state a body sensation and a feeling. So, hey, it would be like, hey, I'm Mike and I'm quite calm right now and I feel at ease, something like that. And so that helps people develop the language and the self-reference point to be able to do that. And if you do that consistently over an extended period of time, what's so beautiful about this type of work is that, or practice, is that what comes out of it, like you could never imagine I don't know, the wonderful things that start to happen as people become or start to feel more safe or more, I don't like that word to be honest, but feel more comfortable expressing themselves. And then you get into these dialogues and these interactions that are much or that are more sincere and honest and open. And then the positive outcomes for that, as I said, are just unpredictable, but they're often almost always very positive.
Yeah, we tend to start our tailgates similar to that, but we really try to pull out wins and challenges, and then how can we help each other, celebrating the wins, but also at the same time understand what one person's challenge is another person's opportunity, and seeing that come out in their own conversation. It usually just starts with a question, and then the team. So we try to, in our culture, make sure that's part of how we start every tailgate. Every morning we take a couple minutes to learn what went really well yesterday and where did you struggle potentially, and as a team, can we help go through that and make it right, or provide the tools to from our experiences to kind of overcome those challenges. So if that's a similar thing and it gets to the same endpoint, I think it's helpful. And you're right, not so much the safety of it, but you allude to the communication. It starts the dialogue.
Yeah, and that's wonderful that you're already doing that. And I try to look at the clock, and I think there's other ways to perhaps bring in practices that might further that thing or deepen kind of the outcome or whatnot. But I mean, that's a pretty good place to be. And yeah, I'm noticing my thoughts being like, I need to get through the next little bit of this and not wanting to, because it's such an important thing. And
well, there's a little piece that I know you have a bunch of stuff, but you started the whole presentation with just your experience with plants. And I know our membership, that's what we do. We nurture plants, landscapes, and what most people participate in don't truly understand it. And how powerful is that to educate our team members about that connection, about even for their own mental health, but the mental health of the customers, those around them, as they go through their day. I just think there's such a healing component. And I think maybe because plants don't talk back, plants don't judge us. Plants are pretty honest. If they're happy, they're healthy. If they're not, they look pretty sickly on the kitchen table or in the backyard. So is there a little bit of that that's really unique to our membership in what you've learned and discovered with people's mental health?
Yeah. And here, that will, I think the first point I have in here. Yeah. So that speaks to the first part of what can help us cultivate well-being and resilience is our values. So this is kind of also something that's not part of this conversation, I think, enough, but typically what happens is when we stray away from our values, we tend to suffer. When we live in alignment with them, we tend to feel better. And so this is called a choice point. It comes from sort of mindfulness, cognitive behavioral model of mental health, but it's quite clear when we're behaving contrary to our values and when we're behaving in alignment with them. So if we do value nature or being connected to plants or whatever it is, animals, even for that matter, can we honor that and recognize when we're behaving in a way that leads us in that direction? So I think like the example I have here, it's not specific to that, but I'm not going to try to come up with another one just for the sake of time. But when I so if I take that example of my kids, like if I'm rude to them or mean to them in a situation that's contrary to my values, to being honest and compassionate and etc., then I hurt. That's hard for me. But when I act in a way that allows me to express my anger and frustration in a way that's respectful and kind and loving, then that actually promotes my well-being. And I know it's not a specific answer to like the plant nature thing, but if we can remember that, and I landscaped for about 5 years after university, and I did stonework, and like I know sometimes how hard, especially when it's hot outside and you're sweating and you're like just the frickin' like, I can't remember, is it a tamper machine? Like when it's just not flat and you're like fucking losing your mind. It's like so frustrating. But in that moment of stress, it's like, okay, I'm noticing, and then I can be compassionate, and then I can remind myself, wait a second, like this work is actually contributing to the well-being of my client, to the work, like, and that, because that's congruent with my value of being of service or being in nature. And like that micro moment of just recognizing that I'm forgetting that, and wait a second, oh, I can be grateful for this, and I can bring myself back into the moment. And so just I'll cover these couple things, and there's a question here too that so another really important thing is to I mentioned it a bit before, but our brains are like Teflon for positive emotion, and they're like sponges for negative information. So what the neuroscientists and researchers say to start imprinting more positive emotion in our nervous system, we have to actually sit and cherish pleasant experiences. So if we notice we're working out and the sun's beaming on us and it feels beautiful, and like actually pausing for like 20 seconds and noticing how good it actually feels for the sun to be beaming down on you right now. Or you see a client's expression of pure joy when they see the awesome work that you've done. Like that's a beautiful moment and experience. And if we can allow ourselves, because another thing that's annoying about being a human is sometimes we don't want to let ourselves feel good, which is also kind of weird. But so we want to be able to cherish and savor these pleasurable moments. And there's a worksheet here that we have that you can use to practice those things. And so I might encourage afterwards we can share that. But this is a really wonderful practice to start getting more habituated to positive emotion. Another thing is to, and in a team dynamic, a beautiful practice is this thing about sitting across from someone or even through Zoom and asking them, like, I would say, hey, Alan, tell me what brings you joy. And then you might say, I don't know, my dog, my kids, my whatever. And then I would say, thank you. And then I would ask you again, and I would ask you like 5 or 10 times, and then you would switch back. You can do that for gratitude as well. And gratitude is another thing that the neuroscientists, and of course, thousands of years of spiritual wisdom practices, like we know being grateful and practicing gratitude is really beneficial for our mental health and well-being. So that's another thing that is a little bit contrary to how we're wired as an organism, as an animal. So it takes practice, it takes effort, and we want to make time to practice gratitude. So if you can start a gratitude journal or practice, that would be tremendously helpful for your well-being. These are, the text is a bit off, but here's a thing to remember. We have all the ingredients, we don't have the recipe, right? Like we all know what to do for ourselves. Like there's a plethora of information out there. We know what we do, but the thing is we don't tend to do it all the time. So why is that? And so all those other self-awareness, negative core beliefs, self-compassion, those skills help us orient ourselves to behavior that's going to be more conducive to our well-being, right? It's not about knowing, it's about doing. And so what gets in the way of us doing? It's all these thoughts and all these impulses and emotions and et cetera that get in the way of us behaving in the world in the way that we want. And that's important to remember. The last thing here is you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. It's a lovely quote. You know, life, another saying here that is often hard to accept is life punishes you first, then teaches you the lesson. So we can't always avoid difficult moments. Like bad things happen and then we learn and then we move on. And I think that's important to remember. So lastly, yeah, we have this event coming up in May, which is super cool. It's for schools and for the workplace. And we wanted to give a bunch of tickets to you, to your crew. Whether you attend or not, you'll have access to some. And I would encourage people, if they do like these conversations, I think we're up to about episode 42 for the podcast. There's lots of good conversations with a bunch of different kind of like people with lived experience. There's a couple on there with people with schizophrenia. One of them is my brother, and we talk a lot about that. Doctors, therapists, all kinds of cool people, athletes. So I'd encourage people to check that out. And somebody said it, one of you said it earlier, just try to be a little more kind to yourself. And sorry, there's one of the issues. I just want to read this question. We think we face now is self-critical attitudes, self-direct glaze, the Zoom meetings with all day glaze. There's also, yeah, the Zoom monster. One thing that I have done lately is I turn off my own camera. So you can click on the 3 buttons and say hide self view. That has been wonderful. So I don't have to look at myself and judge myself and wonder and all that nonsense. Another thing that actually I didn't mention, and I know we're over time, I'll just say this is the neuroscientist. I'm following this guy called Andrew Huberman. He's incredible. He's a neuroscientist and he does all this awesome stuff. He talks about vision. So when we are staring at our screens all the time, or even if at our phones, when our gaze gets super narrow and focused on one thing, that tends to create agitation in our bodies. And so the antidote to that is to like go outside or look outside. If you can, go outside, not just out of a window, and look at the horizon. So as your eyes open to a more vast environment, that tends to reduce your negative emotion. And I would encourage everybody, once they're done here, to go and practice and try themselves. Okay, that's a lot of me talking. Thank you so much for listening. And we're always available, like for people that have follow-up questions at other times. You can email us, you can hit us up in any way that might be helpful. And so I'm happy to also answer some questions now, but I think you all need to continue with your meetings, and thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Mike. It's Joe Salemi. I'm not sure if anyone can see me yet, but absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate all of your insight and perspective and some real world tactics on how to approach certain situations. So super helpful. And I think, the rest of our audience would appreciate that also. And all of the links that you shared and the resources, we'll also share that with the audience and everyone else. So when we send the recording out, we'll include that as well. So thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, likewise. And if I didn't screw up my schedule this morning, I would stay for a bit longer, but I have colleagues that are waiting for me. So I got to be kind to myself. And
no, it's all good. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it, Mike.
Everybody. Yeah. Thanks. Bye.
And what we'll do is continue on with our panel. So we've got some incredible folks from our Landscape Ontario COVID-19 task force. And I'm going to put a question out there, and Terry, Alan, Peter, maybe in that order. What I'm hoping to get out is, at least to start with, is what are you doing as a business leader first to be kind to yourself?
Was I first?
Yeah.
What helps me is that my wife's a registered psychotherapist as well. So for us, for me, it's recognizing and accepting what is happening, and that it's happening to everyone. And I've completely, as much as I can, I've removed a lot of the things that I would see as a drawback. So if I'm not making the money I'm making, if we're not finishing projects on time, all of those things right now or for the last year have not been an issue. It's been my mental health, my staff's mental health, my clients, one way or another, we're going to get through this. If I don't make money, I was in a good position that was not an issue. And it's really helped remove a lot of stress. And the other thing is actually being part of the COVID task force, is that at least once a week and more at the beginning, I've been able to sit down with peers and recognize that we all have the same issues, which has then allowed me to realize that my staff have those same issues. Maybe not to the extent I have or to the particulars that we have, but everyone's going through the same thing. We're all equal in this.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think
Thanks, Terry.
That's a good point, Terry. And I think it's surrounding yourself with people so that you have the ability to have those conversations. And you're right, realizing we don't get to control the variables around us. We get to control the outcomes in many cases of what those new inputs are. And it's a state of mind too. Some see the glass half full versus half empty. A lot of challenges can be challenges, or as we learned in the task force and other conversations with peers, there's usually a greater opportunity in those challenges, but it takes a state of mind to get there. So I think part of it's helping each other understand that, to Terry's point, that it's not, it may seem an immovable object, or the case that we've experienced in the last 12 months is COVID is something that's really hard for us to see, touch, or truly understand. And just how do we temper that with the products and services we do, along with our team members, because it's a big part of the healing. It's a big part of where we've seen actually the exact opposite, more businesses dealing with the stresses of employee fatigue, overwork with high customer demand, is something we weren't anticipating, but have had to deal with. So I think for myself personally, it's just surrounding myself with people and feeling comfortable to reach out and ask questions about how others are doing it, as well as share our experiences like we're doing here today.
Right on. Thanks, Alan. And Peter, how are you being kind to yourself?
Well, it's a constant, I guess, challenge to always bring yourself back. And when you see yourself slipping or having those negative thoughts that Mike discussed, I know one of the points he brought up early on was social connection being an important pillar of mental wellness. And that's something that's probably taken the biggest beating this past year. And for our staff, I mean, I have to deliberately talk to my staff about their personal situation, how they're doing, how are things at home, what are you working on? That's something I have to make sure I have to remind myself to keep doing, because it doesn't come naturally. My first question is always, did you get the job done? Is the customer happy? You know, those are the first things that come to mind when I'm talking to a staff member who happens to be working on a project. So I have to realize that there's a person who is going to be passionate about their work if they're better mentally themselves personally. And it's the whole person that I have to make sure I talk to. And that doesn't come naturally to me. So that's something I've had to learn to do as a business owner. And I hope I'm doing a good job. And personally, the one thing that I have done for myself that's different over the past years, I've been able to spend more time exercising. I mean, I'm not going out to restaurants, I'm not traveling, but I find time to be outside. Like Mike was saying about going outside, I love going outside and just going for a walk in the woods or what have you. And that's something I will remember as something that I've cultivated in myself as a personal habit.
Fantastic. And I'll pose this next question to the panel as well. As leaders, it's important to pick up on signals from our team, and Mike talked about the awareness component of that. Now having been armed with some of the information and tactics that Mike provided with us, can you think back to some of the situations that you may have dealt with in the past with some employees that you may have been able to deal better with now that you have this new information with? Maybe Terry, we'll start with you.
I think the reality is as Peter said, we need to focus on the staff and not what they've just performed. So it's always remembering that we've got to recognize them for what they're doing for us, but also recognizing that even if we're just checking in with them. So there's lots of times that we'll get caught up in the moment and we're not checking in with them, that there's not necessarily that there's issues, but the first interaction, as much as possible, we should try and make it that positive. The job may not be going well, but if we don't come down on them hard, I think you end up with a better result. It's too easy to focus on that negative, or to try and look for a negative. And I think we've all done that in the past, and it's recognizing that, maybe we shouldn't be doing it that way. But again, focusing on just on a personal level as opposed to a work level, just that first initial talk, because it's too easy for them to get the defenses up. And I've had in the last 30 years, that's happened probably more times than it should. But if we recognize it, it's always getting less. And if we can acknowledge that, if it's like, sorry, Al, I probably shouldn't have, started that way, and deal with it, and help to build that relationship back up. And then recognizing that we're only where we are because of our staff. I'm not going out, building that retaining wall in the rain. It's my staff that are doing it. I may hire them. I may do the design. Al's not, fertilizing that lawn. It's his staff. That recognition, personally, I think helps in our dealings with the staff, but recognizing that you're human yourself, and you're going to make mistakes, and be honest with your staff about it.
Thanks, Terry. Alan?
Yeah, I think a little bit of it is where Mike was going. It's difficult sometimes for an individual to have a conversation, as Peter kind of alluded to, in even our own self awareness is making sure that we make time for ourselves, and we take care of ourselves. A little bit of it, I think, as leaders in our individual businesses or in our community, is making sure we're having intentional conversations to understand where people are at, to provide that comfort level that we care about it, and it's part of our planning process. So I know it's gone a long way to sometimes soften the conversations by starting with not so much digging into people's lives, but encourage them to share an experience they've had with their kids, a girlfriend or a boyfriend, a team or something they participate or are not participating with right now, but just to kind of explore and take an interest in an active engagement on how you can participate too. As an employer, I know we've experienced great rewards from getting little tidbits from understanding people's place in life, where they are, and then finding ways to participate in it that were unexpected. It certainly goes a long way, not just I think in their mental health, but in the trust and relationship you have within your organization. And it goes a significant way in them feeling that, he cares about me. I'm going to care about my team, and I'm going to care about the customer, and making sure we meet their objectives. As Mike kind of alluded to, we are gifted in the profession of landscape, from the design right through to the implementation of it, and even our contact with all the do-it-yourself through our garden centers and growers bringing this plant material to the marketplace. it is such a significant mental health connection point that's kind of been, some will say it's been the number one hobby in society for decades. There's a reason for that, and we get to be the purveyors of that. So helping our employees that aren't always necessarily green thumbs when they come to us, but connecting them to that conversation in reality, I think is helpful for their well-being and how they deliver and communicate and put in that extra effort to do the job right, and to do it in a meaningful way that connects with the audience that you're participating with.
Yeah. Hard to disagree with that. Peter, how about you?
So I've certainly learned a lot over the last many years. It's, I know when I was young and starting out and hiring staff, I would want staff that were as eager to work as me. They'd work as hard as me. They'd have the same approach to work as me. And I'd be very frustrated when they didn't have that same response to the same situation. And it took me a while to learn that there are many different types of people out there. And it took me a while to learn that those differences can be strengths. I know Mike said to look for the similarities in people and not the differences, but if you can see what the differences are, and you can find what those people's strengths are, it's more easy to find a position for them where they can be successful. And a long time ago, I lowered my expectations for my staff, and not that I want less productivity, but I don't expect perfection when they go into a job. So you're allowed to learn, you're allowed to improve, and hopefully that relieves some of that stress that they would experience on the job. Hopefully that relieves some of their fear of exposing a mistake that they made. If somebody does something wrong, I'd rather know about it so that we can fix it and not have them bury it in the job. So I've modified my expectations for my staff, and I've learned that those differences can be beneficial to me. And if an employee is in the wrong position, that I will find something else that they may be more interested in, more capable of doing. And I think that helps them feel more empowered and contribute more. And I think that will help their mental well-being as well, that they feel like a more productive contributor to the success of the company and their colleagues.
Absolutely, right on. Thank you. And I'll put out a last question. Terry, we'll start with you. Mike's presentation was full of takeaways for today. What's your biggest takeaway from Mike today? And while you ponder that, I'll pose that to the rest of the audience as well. What is your biggest takeaway from Mike's presentation today?
I think it's just recognizing that mental health is no different than physical health. We may not be able to see it. We can't take an X-ray to see where in the brain, where in the heart is broken. But I think if we can accept that, if we can acknowledge to our staff, to our co-workers, that we recognize that there may be something that's bothering them, they don't have to tell us. They just have to know that, we've accepted them, and that maybe there's an issue. It then gives them permission to deal with it themselves, or to seek further help, or however. So I think that's the biggest takeaway, is just recognizing that that mental health is real, and it's something that we need to be on top of, probably more than physical health. Especially now with COVID. What's going to happen with the schools in the next few days, with potential lockdown and everything else, and how this year is going to work out with our staff, our suppliers, and even our clients.
No doubt. Thanks, Terry. Alan?
I think it a little bit is that compassion piece and understanding. A big part is listening to where people are at. And Terry's right, with the situations that are impacting our business environments internally and more importantly externally to our team members. Because you're right, just even moving things like March break around and moving school closures and daycare systems and all of our, like, it's amazing how much you find that impacts your team, which wouldn't be normal conversations. That would be expected to be taken care of external to the workplace. But I think in listening to Mike, it's more important than we probably give it credit, that we do take the time to listen to that we are compassionate and find solutions for them, because we can actually control the variables in a much more meaningful way than many of them can. And if that reduces the, excuse me, the physical association with the mental stress that comes with it, it's just going to make our teams more productive. So flexibility has already become a theme of 2020. And as we enter into 2021, I expect it to be strong and alive as we look at this year. And lots of new variables as we see the light at the end of the tunnel. How we're going to adapt to the concept of vaccination as it moves into a younger workforce. How are we going to make time for it? How are we going to deal with those that have children and situations at home, or even those they're caring for that don't have access to normal systems? So I know in our company, we're a lot more cognitive of that reality, and we're trying to find compassionate ways to be flexible in dealing with those, while at the same time keeping our teams healthy and obviously meeting customer expectation, which is higher than it's ever been.
Thanks, Alan. Peter, your biggest takeaway for today?
Well, I guess it's reminding us about a lot of the things that we have heard, and that is a constant process. It is a journey. There is no finish line. It is something we have to continually work on. I think that's helpful, and I know, you know, the breath sigh that he gave us as a tool when we're in that moment in the grocery line, and I thought about the person behind me during breath sigh, and I'm like, what am I doing? Them have to do a breath sigh. I thought about Frank Costanza, Serenity Now.
Yes,
that works too. So you know, that's these little things that we have as tools for ourselves are helpful, and they do work, and that I'll keep using them as I continue on this journey of becoming a better person and being kinder to myself and kinder to the people around me.
Thanks, Peter. And a very special thank you to you guys, the panel here today, and the entire Landscape Ontario COVID-19 task force. Yesterday, I believe, was meeting number 119 since this all started. And so, you know, the amount of time, effort, and dedication from the task force has been nothing short of incredible. So in closing, taking care of ourselves can better equip us so that we may take care of others. During times of social distancing and endless lockdowns, it is especially important to stay connected with our friends, our family, our coworkers, and our teams. Helping others cope with stress through phone calls or video chats, just checking in can help us feel less lonely or even isolated. A special thanks again to Mike Stroh for his much needed insight and perspective. Again, all of our panelists today and the entire COVID-19 task force. Until next time, I hope you're staying positive while testing negative. Take care, everybody.